Hands up for who's going to join Jonathan at the next 5:30 cycle meet. Good, well done. Hands up for those people who will join me waving at Jonathan at the next 5:30 meet, and then go to bed and see if you can get to the first session afterwards. Thank you. Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks very much indeed, GRIF. Very exciting that GRIF will be in Amsterdam. That sounds absolutely fantastic and very exciting, and hope to see everybody there too. It's a privilege being in front of you, and it's nice to meet you all over the next few days. Thank you very much indeed to all the team as well, whether it be Jennifer, Annie, Mala, there's Sasha, all the team here for hosting us. It's been a fantastic event already, and we've got another couple of days where we can all meet one another. Right now, we're going to take you to Sin City. It's the insider's view of Sin City. So whilst Sin City has its shadier past, it's very much more now into an inclusive offering. It's changed, it's developed, much as any cities are around the world. It still holds that mantra of what goes in Vegas stays in Vegas. So with some of that background and insight, please join me in welcoming the CEO of the Hakkasan Group, Nick McCabe, for our conversation together. I think Nick and I met for lunch probably a few weeks ago. We share a few friends in common in my old Bacardi days and your old Bacardi day, I think, over in Miami. But you've been over in Sin City for 10 years?
Yeah, that's been 10 years. It started out as a 2 or 3 year run, as everybody does. We'll give it a try, and 10 years on, going strong.
How's the sex, drugs, and rock and roll?
The 3 pillars upon which our brand is built. But no, it's interesting. I mean, I think there's a view of it's not just Las Vegas; it's also the nightlife industry, which obviously forms a significant part of our business. That historically, yes, was Sin City, but I think now it's become an extremely sort of legitimate place to do business from a food and beverage standpoint. I think, Las Vegas is probably, if not the most, certainly one of the most regulated markets in the world in terms of how we operate. And so what it's forced us to do is find ways to take a very sort of a very focused, a very sort of considered approach to both dining and nightlife, and figure out how to put those together in a market which is massively competitive, massively regulated, which doesn't make it particularly easily.
And so, actually, what's the Hakkasan Group? Because it's not just about that one Hakkasan brand. There's quite a few brands you've got in that group that you manage, fundamentally, and you've got a whole load of outlets across the world. So just very quickly, for everybody who doesn't know some of those brands that you're operating, Hakkasan is sort of one of the primary known brands, but the other ones that you're operating as well?
Yeah, so Hakkasan is what we call our Trojan horse brand, right? So that's really the brand that drives everything, and the reason for the name of the group. But we have around 25 brands in total in the portfolio, roughly 60 venues around the world, about a third of those in Las Vegas. And so we tend not to think about our business in terms of categorization, right? So it's not about restaurants versus nightclubs. It's really about experiences. It's something that my old colleague Didier, I think, touched on a little bit before, which is that I don't think the consumer likes to categorize, so why do we, right? It's very convenient for us to think about a restaurant or a lounge or a nightclub in order to organize our business in a way that makes sense to us internally, but we don't think it's how the consumer looks at our business. And so while we have all of the things in our portfolio, we come at it from an experiential standpoint and think about kind of blurring the lines between those concepts and making it much more about the consumer's journey through them as opposed to our view of them internally.
And you talk about consumers. You don't necessarily talk about, and your business isn't necessarily, is it being led by food and by chefs?
No, it's not. I mean, food is obviously a key component of what we do, but even within just Hakkasan itself as a brand, we think of that as a brand that is really for all 5 senses, right? So food and taste being one, but the ambience of the space, the design, the choice of music, the incense that we burn when you walk through the front door, and the smell that you're immersed in is really all part of it. That's why, again, when we specifically think about Hakkasan, there's never a Hakkasan recipe book. There is no takeaway box, right? There's nothing that you can experience outside of our 4 walls because it's truly immersive. Mm-hmm. And again, I think that speaks partially to kind of that Las Vegas approach, right? So the whole mission in Vegas is, I think as everybody knows, it's no clocks, it's no windows, it's this kind of labyrinthine spaces which are very hard to find your way out of. And which I'm sure we've all gotten trapped in until 5 or 6 in the morning sometimes. No. But it's the idea of total immersion from a consumer standpoint, and that's what we try and bring into our concepts as well.
And do you think that's sort of Vegas's mantra? Is that something you can learn even here? I mean, as I've always said in these particular markets, whenever you're doing F&B and it's in hotels, there's always a barrier to get over a front door because you're through a hotel, you've got to go up in a lift, there's those barriers. Do you think that's that opportunity of that sort of labyrinth experience anyway? Is that a learning you can take out of Vegas, which is make it big, keep it immersive, keep people there?
It absolutely is, and I don't know if it's just about big in terms of size, right? It's more about compelling in terms of experience, right? So an example would be we just opened a new project down in Cabo 2 weeks ago. And so a project with a partner down there called Vedanta. And the idea was, how do we capture a consumer at 11 a.m. and keep that consumer until midnight? How do we never let them escape? And not by locking up the doors, but by offering kind of multiple experiences throughout day parts that are compelling, interesting, and that flow into one another seamlessly, right? Which is another thing that Vegas does very well. And so in that project, we launched a day club, 2 restaurant brands, and a bar. But essentially, it's one kind of immersive entertainment experience that just takes all of the skill sets, all of the disciplines that we know as a business, and melds them together into a day-long experience.
And it's interesting. So you're planning consumer first in that location, or you plan the location and then the consumer?
No, it's driven by consumer need. But I think what we do is we understand need in terms of this very basic function, right? So what is consumer need? It's to enjoy yourself, right? It's to immerse yourself in experience and get as much out of it as possible. And so what we think is, it's not about going to market and saying, okay, do we need a Mexican restaurant or do we need a dim sum concept over here? It's more about kind of what's that journey throughout a day, right? What is the consumer looking for day part wise? What's the vibe of the place? Cabo is a little bit different from Las Vegas in terms of being a little bit more of a kind of getaway and more of a relaxed location for a trip. And so we think about the day club experience, for example, is a little bit different to the Las Vegas kind of all singing, all dancing craziness. And that's how we modify as we go market to market. But I think overall, the idea of kind of a day-long, night-long immersive experience that has multiple touch points is what underpins everything we do.
Interesting. Does anybody else think of it like that here in the Middle East? Do you start think about the consumer and about how you're going to keep a consumer in a certain space? So my experience is it's almost the other way around. Actually, this hotel could do with a Mexican. This hotel needs its all-day dining. And there's this sort of like linear. Sometimes there is I'm not saying all the time. Sometimes there's that linear process. Do you think that the consumer in Vegas then is a mature enough consumer where there's enough learning? Fundamentally, are you taking that consumer learning from Vegas and applying it in different places around the world as you guys globally expand?
Yeah, I think so. I think it depends what you think of as the typical Vegas consumer, right? I think we all have a stereotype of what that is, but it's changed significantly along the years. I think you could look at the Cosmopolitan as a bit of a turning point in Las Vegas, where a group came in and said, okay, if we just open our hotel rooms on an as-is basis and take our fair market share of Las Vegas, we'll be unsuccessful. There's not enough business there. We need to bring a new consumer. And they took quite an interesting sort of avant-garde approach to marketing and to overall kind of brand building within their building and brought a kind of a younger, trendier, if you like, consumer into Las Vegas, which then parlayed into experiences we provide. And so, I think, again, it's not necessarily about the consumer that Las Vegas appeals to, because I think it's a complete cross-section of the entire global community. I think it's more about how do you capture most wallet share as possible from those consumers.
And there's two things out there. Number one, it's that marketing's driven that. So what you've done is you've probably taken a segment of a consumer segment and said, actually, do you know what? We've done a bit of research. Let's market to this particular area and let's bring these people in. And you think is that hotels driving that? Is that local tourism driving that? Who drives that, bringing in that new market?
I think it's a citywide initiative, right? I think everybody rises with the tide in Las Vegas, and so there is a fairly communal approach to how do we look at the market. But it's interesting how it's changed. I think when I moved there, I'd say it was 70-30 in terms of revenue breakdown, right? 70% being gaming-oriented and 30% being food and beverage, entertainment, all the other sectors that we know about. And that's entirely turned on its head now. So really is 70% food and beverage and entertainment, 30% gaming. And the gaming really is secondary in terms of an attraction, in my opinion, to entertainment. And so it's driven more and more by our industry and by content, right? Content is the other really key part of what we do. We think about a few key words in our business, content being one and access and experience being the other two. But certainly from a nightlife standpoint, that content and that value proposition is what drives a consumer. And so it's building concepts around that content that begins to make sense.
And as an F&B operator, your background fundamentally is not F&B. Is it your background's nightlife?
It's nightlife,
music,
it's brand and music, and that kind of part of the world. Yeah, I think dining is a part of the business that I came into 7-8 years ago. Certainly wasn't the core of what I did historically. But again, I think that speaks to our approach, which is that we don't think about it as a specific discipline business, right? Yep. Because we think about it as the entertainment business, the experience business. I mean, if you asked 20 executives from our company. Some might say it's an entertainment business, some might say it's hospitality. That's pretty driven by their own background and their experiences in the world that we live in. But yeah, so from my own background, I began in the music business, large events and nightlife. And then obviously we took over Hakkasan Group roughly 5 years ago. Became experts quickly in the dining business as we had to. But I think it's interesting. Hopefully what that's done is it's brought a fresh perspective into how we look at the business and how we've expanded it, which has led to the kind of positioning that we've chosen today.
And do you think there's sort of content that you put out to the marketplace, out to the consumer, do you think that's your core driver? I mean, a lot of people try and get, so there's these marketing mediums. People talk about Instagram and Instagram or food, and you have to do this and you have to do that. How do you guys approach content? It's such a big pillar for you.
It is a huge pillar for us, and I think we did some brand work a few years ago. So what was interesting was when we stepped into this business, while Hakkasan was an extremely strong brand, there'd been very little work done to actually document and position that brand formally, right? And to listen to the consumer and say, what is it you love about the brand, right? Because I think in our business, we all have to recognize that the consumer is the important part of what we do. And so listening to their feedback on the brand is crucial. And I'd say in that process, which was about a year-long process, we figured out we knew maybe 60% of what we heard, and the other 40% was brand new to us. But what our consumer told us was, we're looking for addictive experiences, right? This is what we're after. So it's not just a great experience, it's a great experience that we want to come back to time and time again. And what does that? And for us, the content is flexible, right? The content may be a DJ, the content may be a dish of food, the content may be the background music in the restaurants. What was interesting was, when we did a lot of brand research, we heard very little about, there's great food and there's great service. I think that's the baseline expectation that exists in our business today, right? We focus on it, obviously, from a back-of-house standpoint, but I'm not sure the consumer is particularly interested in the individual facets of that. What we heard was, I love the detailed embroidery on the banquette, or I love the way my chopsticks are placed in front of me, or I love the way my plate always faces the same way, or I love the music that I heard, or I love this experience that I had in the restaurant. And it was a great story we heard for a customer of ours, a lady who was about 75 years old, but come into the restaurants forever, and came to the restaurant one day and brought her grandkids and said to our GM, hey, could I take the kids back in the kitchen? Could they take a look? They're really interested in kind of the chef life. Now, unfortunately, the Hakkasan kitchen is a really sort of chaotic, hot, dangerous space, right? The wok firing and that kind of thing. What was great, though, was what the GM didn't say was, no, I'm sorry, we can't. What the GM said was, well, that's maybe a little dangerous for your granddaughter, but let me do something else. Took her back in the pastry kitchen, had her making macarons for the day. And this was an experience that this lady talked about as being why the brand affinity existed between her and Hakkasan, right? Had nothing to do with the food, the service, which was the expectation. Mm-hmm. It was that little experience that made her loyal to us.
And there's the one thing that stuck out to me as soon as you started talking about it, you spent a year going over your brand. A year.
A year. So we did sessions here in Dubai, in London, and in Beverly Hills. And those were mixed sessions between consumers, executives, operational staff, on a no-names basis, right? So everybody's just there on a communal basis. It was a focus group on steroids, if you will, right? It was sort of a huge session to try and get to the inside of the brand. But that's what we learned was the brand's simply an experience that people desire.
To me, it's really interesting. I don't think people look at the brand enough of that background. I don't think they ever really, they look at their sort of, where they want to go, what they want to do, what they're going to promise, all those sort of like marketing, what people used to, and I still lovingly term as marketing guff, that sort of stuff that you're actually meant to build.
Fluffy bullshit is what we call it.
Fluffy bullshit. But actually how then it sort of delivers and drives through. But you've talked about it already. You've told me, said, hang on, we planned our brand for over a year. We knew that content was going to be really, really heavy. And we knew that all the things that we in theory would talk about are givens. And everything else we're doing is now deemed as content.
Well, that's right. But the key challenge was, and the reason we focused so much on the brand was, we were moving from dining into nightlife at that point, right? So Hakkasan had been known traditionally as a fine dining experience. That was the extent of what the brand did. And we just opened, or we're just getting ready to open a huge nightclub in Las Vegas, a $100 million investment. So the question was, what can we find from kind of a brand pillar standpoint? What is the commonality between those two experiences? And how do we create a lens to look through when we look at future opportunities? We knew that demand would come. We knew there'd be interest globally to expand our brands, but we needed a decision-making vehicle, right? A way in which to look at the brand and understand what the underlying nature of it was. So how do you contrast? Because fine dining by its design is a very controlled experience, right? Mm-hmm. Everything from the greeting at the front door to the seating process to the food and service in between. Yeah. is a very curated, very planned and scheduled experience. Nightlife is controlled chaos, right, by design. Now, behind the scenes, in the back of house, it's a very controlled business, but front of house, it's insane. And if your nightclub is not crazy and insane, you're not successful. So how do you resolve those two things? How do you resolve a very controlled, very curated dining experience with that nightlife piece? And that's why we went to the consumer and said, all right, why don't you tell us? And that was the underpinning was, it's this idea of an addictive experience. We chose a phrase which was kind of interesting. So we decided that the phrase that best described Hakkasan was cinematic energy. This is what we came up with. For all that work, all that year, it was really 2 words. But those 2 words now allow us to make decisions in an informed way. That's how we look at projects. We say, if you don't feel like James Bond walking in there, then it's maybe not for us.
Wow. There you go. So success. It's only a year away for anybody who wants any brand planning. So how's Sin City seeing your brands now? Do you think they've changed their opinion of your brand in the last, since you've done your brand planning, or do you think what you've done is actually just bolster their original opinion? Is it giving you a differentiator in market that's going to keep you competitive and leading the marketplace?
Well, I think what it's done is allowed us to create new brands with a similar sort of underpinning for what we're trying to achieve, right? Because what we did was, very early on, we decided that while it was a Hakkasan nightclub in Las Vegas, our intent was not to become particularly ubiquitous, right? Another thing that we learned through our research was that people don't want to see us in every corner, right? They don't want us to be McDonald's. Nobody wants a Hakkasan, in every market they walk into. They want that I have to go find it kind of feel. And so we created a second brand called Omnia to kind of satisfy the nightclub demand, right? Obviously, Hakkasan is a fantastic experience. We raised the bar for nightlife in Las Vegas, and we wanted to continue to open new concepts globally, but maybe not take the risk with the Hakkasan brand of doing that in too many places. But again, I think what it all came back to was, and what's interesting about Las Vegas is, I'm not sure there was an awareness of the brand ahead of time. That was one of the challenges, is that while we were very well known internationally, I think in the US, Hakkasan was not a particularly well-known brand. There'd been a couple of stumbles with opening locations in other cities. And so the question was, how do you make enough noise and fanfare around the brand to really position it within the US? And that's why the idea of the nightclub came from.
It's brilliant. So even with that other sort of nightlife brand, how is the Hakkasan brand expanding across the world? Are you just buying up the world? Are you licensing the brands out your franchising? What sort of things are you doing?
It's actually a really careful approach. So we're growing very aggressively from a volume of venue standpoint, but in terms of the Hakkasan brand specifically, it's quite a slow burn. We're very cautious about the markets that we go into. Again, we don't want to be too ubiquitous with that brand. But when I say it's the Trojan horse, it's really the brand that opens doors globally for us. So a lot of the projects we do begin with a I want Hakkasan phone call. And I'd say 85-90% of the time that doesn't necessarily work. But rather than just saying no thank you and closing the door to that conversation, what we've been able to do is parlay that into, well, hey, Hakkasan maybe doesn't work, but here are 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 other brands that may. So a great example is Ling Ling. So Ling Ling is a brand that we created a couple of years back because we found ourselves saying no too often, right? So an example is in Mykonos. We had a group come to us who operate Namos. Probably the best beach club in Mykonos. Fantastically successful experience. Again, a blur between, is it restaurant, is it day club? It's a bit of everything. And they had a project that they wanted to do. Now, typically, with Hakkasan, there's a very high cost of build, high cost of entry. It's a very high quality kind of architectural experience. But rather than say no, we said, all right, what if we could create an offshoot brand that has some of the character, some of the key tenets of what Hakkasan is, but it's more affordable to build, more affordable to operate. And so we created Ling Ling in response to that demand. So we reduced the menu, reduced the cost of the kitchen, reduced the fit-out cost, and made it a little bit more scalable to individual markets. First one we opened was in Mykonos. We're now in Mykonos, Marrakesh, and Oslo with many more following. So I think Ling Ling is the brand that we can roll out a little bit more aggressively and get into more markets. Certainly those seasonal kind of tourism-oriented markets.
Wow. Well, it's a good start. I think it's been a bit of a brand 101. I know brand planning and that sort of stuff takes a long time for people, but that's been a really good thing. Any last-minute questions as we just roll into knowing that the time's going to be up soon? Any questions from the audience we want to cover? Is there anybody got anything burning? You're going to be around, Nick, anyway, for people to come up and say hi and please let me invest in all your brands and help me with brand planning for the next year and that sort of stuff. And actually, the last thing I wanted to... there's one bit that I quite liked. I haven't talked to you about this yet. Sorry.
Appreciate the heads up.
Yeah, good. So you guys have got, you do quite a lot. There's a little section on your website, it's philanthropy. You have a number of sort of charities and there's some stuff that you do there. Why, you've not really picked one, you've got 8, 10. Why have you not picked water aid or something and then gone sort of wider? What's the...
I mean, I'd love to tell you there was a master plan there and we thought it through significantly, which we absolutely did not. I think from a philanthropic perspective, it's really more about responding to need, right? So obviously we had a pretty hideous incident in Las Vegas, October of last year. But what it comes back to is the power of content, right? So everybody after the shooting in Las Vegas was thinking, what do we do, right? Shell-shocked. How do we respond? How do we give back? And what we said was, all right, let's go round up some friends, the big DJs that we work with, and just put on a party, right? What else can we do in response to that kind of incident? And the idea was twofold. One was to raise money, and it raised $1 million in the end, which was a fantastic number. But number two was to respond and say, no, we're not going to be pushed back by this. No, we're not going to kind of duck under and start changing the way we do business. We're going to respond strongly. We're going to say we'll come back from this. That was the underpinning idea. But that's really what we do. Is again, it comes back to the idea of kind of responding to need rather than us trying to master plan and design every part of our business.
Brilliant. Nick, it's been a pleasure to talk to you for the last 20 minutes. I'm sure you'll join me in thanking him very much indeed. See you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.